Yeah. Actually, the question he now spoke of Jesus and his instruction about turning another cheek when somebody strikes you, or one cheek, and he says, to what extent this may be a general principle for the world behavior?
There's no answer, unfortunately. The whole Christian history is witness to the fact that this is no answer. But leaving that aside, because it will be another question of criticizing the so-called Christian values which are attributed to Jesus Christ. In my opinion, Jesus Christ is one of the most misunderstood persons in the history of the world. But that is another subject which I can follow with evidence, of course. Here, let me point out additionally that Marxism was built not on dialectical materialism. That was what followed. It was built on the conviction of Marx that man is an immoral animal. So if you leave things to man to discipline himself, he will always act immorally. Right? This is the first brick laid by Marx, which was the undoing of communism itself. Because if he is right in his analysis that humans are immoral, then he is wrong in his conclusion that any system can produce results as though humans who are responsible for running the systems are moral. They will remain immoral because communism cannot change their psyche. So it was built on paradoxes. First of all, he denied humans to be able to dispense with absolute justice anywhere in the society because they're immoral. Then he proposes a system which has to be run by immoral people. And the same problem will appear. That immoral people never run a system with morality, and the system itself is just a mechanism in their hands which they will employ to their own personal advantage rather than the advantage of the society. That is the reason why communist empire collapsed, because those responsible for running it became more and more immoral, more and more insensitive to the real requirements of the masses they governed. And because this was realized by the masses, so they had to use coercion. The question of coercion comes here. They had to be dealt with iron hands, like Stalin did, because there was no running away from it. People knew that wrong is being done to them in the name of good, and those who command and control the affairs, they are corrupt, they are selfish, with the result that to keep the discipline properly, and not properly but permanently saddled, coercion is necessary. And the wrong concept of coercion, where it should not have been used. So that is the entire history of communism, starting from Lenin himself. The bullets which riddled the masses who were raising their voice for bread at the early time of Lenin is a proof. Then what happened throughout the history of Stalin being in command? And whatever followed is exactly the same story repeated differently in different postures.